They forced a black woman to wash dishes at luxury party, not knowing her husband owned the mansion. What would you do if the world mistook the lady of the house for a servant? At a glittering luxury party filled with the city's richest, a black woman was mocked, humiliated, and forced to wash dishes as though she didn't belong. The guests laughed, certain she was nothing more than hired help. But what they didn't know was that the mansion, the wealth, and every sparkling chandelier above their heads belonged to her husband. By the end of the night, their smug smiles would vanish, replaced with shock they would never forget. The Harrington Mansion stood like a fortress of wealth on the edge of the Hudson River, its limestone facade glowing beneath the floodlights. Chauffeurs idled in the circular driveway. Luxury cars lined like soldiers. Rolls-Royces, Bentleys, Ferraris. Guests emerged in silk gowns and hand-tailored tuxedos, dripping with diamonds and arrogance. Their laughter, polished and rehearsed, echoed up the marble staircase and spilled into the grand entry hall. Inside, an orchestra played beneath chandeliers that glittered like constellation. Waiters glided between the elite with trays of champagne and foie gras. The Harringtons' parties were the kind whispered about for weeks, lavish, exclusive, untouchable. Every guest felt chosen, plucked from the masses to bask in the glow of old money. Among them walked Amara Williams. At 32, she carried herself with a quiet grace. Her navy blue dress was modest compared to gowns dripping with sequins and jewels around her, but on her, it looked timeless. Her natural curls were pinned elegantly, her dark skin glowing beneath the chandelier light. She held her head high, though eyes lingered on her with something sharper than curiosity. Judgment. She felt it immediately. The stares, the whispers that trailed her like shadows. She doesn't look like she belongs here. Must be with the staff. Strange choice of dress for a Harrington party. The words cut, though no one said them directly to her face. Not yet. It happened first near the bar. A woman with ice blonde hair, her gown sparkling like a mirrored star, lifted her hand. Her diamond bracelet clinked as she waved Amara over. "You there," she said crisply. "These glasses need clearing. They've been sitting far too long." Amara blinked. For a second, she thought the woman must be speaking to someone else. But then the woman's eyes hardened, gesturing pointedly at the cluster of half-empty flutes beside her. Before Amara could respond, a man shoved a glass toward her, his tuxedo strained against his belly, his gold watch flashing under the light. "Ah, thank goodness," he said. "I was beginning to wonder if the service had gotten lazy tonight." Their laughter rippled outward, drawing in others who turned to watch. Amara's throat tightened. She wanted to say something, to tell them they were wrong, to remind them she was no one's servant. But the weight of their smug smiles pressed her down. Slowly, she set the glasses on a passing tray, her silence feeding their amusement. "Efficient," the man muttered with a smirk. Turning back to his drink, she moved away quickly, her heart pounding. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for one face. Her husband, the man who owned this mansion, this wealth, this glittering empire. If he were at her side, no one would dare. But he had stepped away to handle some business before the party, leaving her alone in the sea of wolves. And wolves could smell weakness. By the time dinner began, their whispers had grown bolder. At the long mahogany table, where crystal glasses sparkled and candles flickered in golden holders, the blonde woman's voice rang out again, high and shrill. "There are dishes piling up in the kitchen," she announced loudly, her eyes fixed on Amara. "And since you're standing idle, why don't you make yourself useful?" Gasps mingled with laughter. Heads turned. Smirks spread across painted lips and polished faces. Amara's cheeks burned hot, but she stood frozen. One of the men leaned back, chuckling. "Go on, sweetheart, the dishes won't wash themselves." The orchestra faltered for a beat, as though the cruelty had rippled to the air itself. Amara wanted to scream, to tell them the truth, that she was the mistress of this mansion, not its maid, that every glittering chandelier had been chosen with her input, every piece of art on the walls hung under her guidance, that her husband had built this empire, and she had stood beside him every step of the way. But the laughter swallowed her word. With her spine stiff, she turned and walked toward the kitchen. The heavy door swung shut behind her, sealing off the music and chatter. Inside, the kitchen buzzed with staff moving in a rhythm of service. Steam rose from silver pots. Plates clinked. Knives chopped with precision. Yet when they saw her, confusion flickered across their faces. "Ma'am," a young waiter stammered, "you don't need to." Amara forced a smile. "It's fine." She moved to the dish station, where crystal and china lay stacked high, smeared with remnants of sauces and half-eaten delicacies. The sponge felt foreign in her hand as she turned on the faucet, hot water rushing over her fingers. She scrubbed, plate after plate, glass after glass. The humiliation clung heavier than the grease. Each dish became a symbol of how they saw her. not as an equal, not as a guest, but as less. And yet, beneath her shame, something stronger simmered. She knew a truth they didn't. The Harrington Mansion wasn't theirs. It wasn't the blonde woman's playground or the fat man's stage. It belonged to her husband. Every square foot of marble, every pane of glass, every glittering chandelier. And when he arrived, when he stepped into that room and saw what they had done to his wife, then the laughter would die. The reckoning was coming, and it would begin tonight. Amara's hand shook as she dried the last glass, but her eyes were steady now. She rehearsed in her mind the moment she would stand tall, the words she would say when the truth came crashing down. For now, she scrubbed. For now, she endured. But the night was far from over. The clinking of crystal glasses and the low hum of laughter still floated beyond the kitchen doors. But for Amara, time seemed to have slowed. Her hands were raw from scrubbing, her navy dress damp from the splashes of soapy water. She set the last polished plate onto the drying rack and drew in a shaky breath. She told herself to be patient. He would come. And then he did. The door swung open, and in walked Jonathan Harrington, her husband, tall, commanding, dressed in a tailored midnight suit that shimmered faintly under the kitchen's light. He looked every bit the titan of industry that he was. His salt and pepper hair was neatly styled, his sharp jawline set with quiet authority. He carried an aura that silenced a room the moment he entered, the kind of presence only built by years of power and respect. His eyes fell instantly on her. Amara? His voice was low, but it carried a weight that made the staff freeze. He crossed the kitchen in long strides, his brow furrowing. What are you doing here? Why are your hands? He glanced at the sink, then back at her, disbelief flashing across his face. Who made you do this? Amara tried to smile, though her voice quivered. It doesn't matter. You're here now. Jonathan's gaze hardened. He reached gently for her hands, turning them over in his. The soap clung to her skin, a humiliating reminder. For a long moment, he said nothing. His silence was more dangerous than fury. Finally, he straightened, his eyes narrowing with cold resolve. Come with me. He guided her out of the kitchen, pushing the doors open with force. The music swelled again, the orchestra playing a lively waltz, the glittering crowd deep in conversation and laughter. No one noticed at first, but then whispers stirred, heads turned, conversations faltered. The master of the house had arrived. Jonathan Harrington, someone murmured. He's here. The man with the gold watch paled. The blonde woman stiffened, her glass frozen halfway to her lip. Jonathan led Amara to the center of the grand hall. He let go of her hand only to step forward, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. Which one of you, he said, calm but deadly, thought it appropriate to treat my wife as a servant in her own home? A silence fell so heavy that even the orchestra faltered again, the violin squeaking to a halt. The guests glanced at one another nervously, but no one spoke. Jonathan's eyes swept the room, unblinking. I asked a question. The blonde woman swallowed hard, setting her glass down with a trembling hand. I didn't know, she stammered. She didn't say she was your wife. Jonathan's lips curled into a bitter smile. She didn't have to. Her dignity should have been enough. Murmurs rippled through the hall. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. Others bowed their heads in shame, but a few still smirked, unwilling to admit their cruelty. Jonathan wasn't finished. He stepped closer to the blonde woman, his presence towering over her. You ordered her to wash dishes. His voice dropped, colder now. Do you know how many lives Amara has touched? How many foundations she funds? How many scholarships she built with her own hand? While you spend your husband's money on gowns and gossip, she works to uplift thousands, and you dare to reduce her to this. The woman's face burned crimson. She tried to speak, but no words came. Then Jonathan turned to the man with the gold watch. And you, he said sharply. You shoved your glass into her hand. Tell me, when was the last time you built something? Or do you spend your days leeching from the wealth of others, mistaking arrogance for achievement? The man's jaw tightened, but he couldn't meet Jonathan's eyes. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Finally, Jonathan stepped back to Amara's side. He took her hand, raising it for all to see. This woman is my wife. She is the mistress of this house, the heart of this family, and the reason I stand here today. If any of you cannot respect her, then you do not deserve to stand under this roof. Gasps erupted. A few guests immediately began making excuses, their voices desperate. Jonathan, we didn't know. It was a misunderstanding. She didn't correct us. Jonathan raised his hand, silencing them. Ignorance is not an excuse for cruelty. He turned to the staff, who had emerged from the kitchen, their eyes wide with disbelief. Please show these guests the door, he instructed coldly. The blonde woman's mouth fell open. You're throwing us out? Yes. Jonathan's voice was final. Leave. Tonight. And remember this. Wealth can buy you an invitation, but it cannot buy you character. The staff moved quickly, guiding the stunned guests toward the exit. Some protested, some begged, but one by one, They were escorted out. The orchestra remained frozen, their bows hovering above string, until Jonathan gave a nod for them to continue playing softly. When the last of the offenders had been removed, the room seemed to breathe again. The remaining guests, those who had not mocked or humiliated Amara, stood quietly, their eyes lowered in shame. Jonathan turned back to his wife. He brushed a damp curl from her face, his expression softening. "I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner." Amara shook her head gently. "No, you came exactly when you were meant to." For the first time that evening, she allowed herself to smile, not the forced, polite smile she had worn to endure the cruelty, but a genuine one, the smile of a woman who knew her worth was no longer invisible. Jonathan slipped his arm around her waist and led her to the head of the table. Together they sat, and this time, no one dared mistake who she was. The night continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. The chandeliers still glittered, the music still flowed, but there was a new weight in the room, a reminder that power was not only measured by wealth or status, but by how one treated others. Amara lifted her glass, her dark eyes scanning the room. "To dignity," she said quietly, her voice carrying just enough to be heard. "To dignity," Jonathan echoed, raising his own glass, and the hall followed. That night, the story of Amara Williams spread far beyond the Harrington Mansion. Whispers turned into retellings into headlines. The black woman who had been mocked as a servant was revealed as the lady of the house, her dignity shining brighter than the chandelier. And those who had laughed at her, they carried their shame like a shadow they could never outrun. Because some parties are remembered for their music, their wealth, their glamour, but this one was remembered for its lesson. And Amara, once humiliated, left that night not broken, but victorious. If you like and want more videos like this, subscribe to support the black talent.